This is a sketch of what we're actually seeing in front of us, with the big mountain of Dhoolagiri here and the big folds on the peak of Tukche to the right, with this enormous great fault that is magnificently exposed right along the base of Dhoolagiri, coming right down to the Kaligandaki River Valley at the bottom.
The fault is a fracture running right through the mountains.
Well, the first step in deforming the Himalayas is that the rocks are folded into giant folds. And when that process continues, the rock can no longer fold, so they become overturned folds. And when the process continues even further, that overturned fold actually moves along a very discrete fault plane. And that's exactly what we see throughout the whole Himalayas. So rocks are formed by folding and thrusting.
Rocks can only be bent so far. Once rock has been bent beyond its limits, it breaks and causes a fault. The process of faulting puts different rock types one on top of the other.
Faults are juxtaposed rocks of two different types. So the big, huge fault that cuts through the tops of the high Himalayas, the top of Everest, are rocks that are putting limestones over marble.
This is exactly what was revealed by Kenton's rock samples from Everest. Limestones at the summit, lying on top of the hard marble of the yellow band. Evidence that the top of Everest was initially created by folding and faulting. But this only explains part of the story. To create a mountain the size of Everest, geologists knew that there must have been another, more powerful mountain building process at work. Clues to exactly what this process was can be found in the Kalemdikola River.
This river is a giant garbage chute, bringing all these boulders eroded off the high Himalayas to the north and sweeping them down in great floods down to the plains of India to the south. So this was a great place to come to sample all the rocks that make up the high mountains to the north.
As any detective knows, some of the best finds are made by sifting through garbage. This time it's garbage from the Himalayan peaks.
This is exactly the rock I've been looking for. This is a beautiful example of a kyanite gneiss, which is composed of these beautiful blue bladed crystals of kyanite.
Kyanite is a gemstone, and it gives a clue as to how these rocks formed.
This mineral is very specific to a geologist, and it tells us that this rock has been buried to depths of about 30 miles or more under high temperature and high pressure.
Rock was not only pushed upwards by the collision, but also down towards the Earth's molten core. Heat and pressure changed the rock and formed kyanite crystals. Another boulder in the river gives a further clue as to what was going on at these great depths.
This white rock is a Himalayan granite, and most of the highest peaks of the Himalayas are actually formed of this rock. And of course, the base of Everest is formed of exactly the same. The presence of these white streaks tell me that this rock was actually partially molten at the highest temperatures during the Himalayan mountain building process.
The rock was pushed so far beneath the Earth's surface that it reached heat in excess of 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit and began to melt. Once it was molten, it was able to move and flow.
Well, you can think of the Himalayas more as a conveyor belt system, taking Indian plate rocks, pushing them down deep in the crust. They are altered by heating and increasing pressure, eventually melting to produce granite, and then forced back up to the surface along these giant shear plains.
20 million years ago, this amazing conveyor belt system was at work. As India pushed northwards, a liquid band of buoyant rock was forced towards the surface and cooled, forming a solid layer of granite, a process called channel flow.
Granites are very buoyant rocks, so when they're formed by partial melting of the crust, normally they're pushed up through the crust to form mountain ranges like you see in the Sierra Nevada or Yosemite National Park, for example. The Himalayas are different. These granites are flowing almost horizontally from where they formed the southern part of the Tibetan Plateau to form the high peaks of the Himalayas. And it's this conveyor belt system that keeps the high Himalayas actively uplifting to this day.
The mountains were repeatedly jacked up to epic proportions. It's this unique process which accounts for the Himalayas' immense size. Kenton Kuhl's mission to Everest uncovered an unusually thick band of granite. Proof that Everest's awesome size is due to the process of channel flow. Geologists investigating how Everest was built have discovered folds and faults, proof of the initial mountain building process. White stripes of granite indicate the rock was melted at over 4,000 degrees, forming a giant conveyor belt of mountain building power. But the Himalayas were set to become part of a geological battle between catastrophic forces and powers which would challenge the very height of Everest. 400 million years ago, the Himalayas started out life at the bottom of an immense ocean. 50 million years ago, they were thrust into the skies as India smashed into the Asian landmass. Since that time, tectonic forces have created the tallest mountain in the world. But what of the immediate future? Will Everest continue to rise, or will this giant soon be cut down? John Galecka is investigating whether the processes which built Everest continue to this day. He has traveled to the remotest regions of Nepal and India, setting up GPS stations, which he hopes will provide him with the answer.
All right, come as far as I can by car, and I've got a 3-hour walk straight up the slope. Namaskar.
Just like a GPS in a car, this station is able to pick up signals from satellites and monitor any movement of the ground.
The GPS station has been operating continuously for the last 5 years, so every second of every day of every month of every year, it's taking a data sample, and what it's looking for is changes in the position of where the station is, but how it's moving, the velocity of this station, believe it or not, and even changes in velocity.
The readings from the GPS show that India is still moving, about 2 inches every year. 50 million years after its initial collision, it is still on its relentless journey northwards, pushing underneath Asia. And as it does so, Everest continues to be pushed higher. But there is a dark consequence to this mountain building. Earthquakes.
So what's going on here in the Nepal Himalaya, we've got the Indian tectonic plates sort of ramming into Asia. In this case, India is losing out. It's being forced under Asia. But it's unfortunate that they're locked frictionally, and eventually, over the course of hundreds of years, that strain is accumulated and then released suddenly in a giant earthquake.
The Himalayas have seen 15 major earthquakes in the past 100 years. The most recent to hit was in Pakistan. October 8th, 2005. The quake devastated the region. Galetska's readings show that another earthquake is on its way. Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, lies in the center of the danger zone.
When that earthquake happens, not if, when that earthquake happens, it's going to be several minutes of terror. There'll be strong shaking, in Kathmandu. There'll be just collapsed structures. You'll see landslides on all these mountains. It's going to be complete devastation. 26 million people in Nepal, 50 million people along the whole arc of the Himalayan range. All of these people will be affected.
These devastating earthquakes are the result of a very active mountain belt. Further evidence that Everest is being actively pushed upward. But there is a second force at work in these mountains: erosion.
There's a constant battle going on in nature here between the uplift of the Himalayas and the down-cutting of erosion.
Erosion in the Himalayas is ferocious. A clue as to the reason why lies in a small village 300 miles east of Everest, Cherrapunji. It's the wettest place on planet Earth, averaging over 432 inches of rain each year. This place is 12 times wetter than Seattle. And the reason for all this rain? The monsoon.
The Indian monsoon system is an almost unique system on the planet. And the ultimate driving force is the high mountains and the high Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau, which is by far the largest area of high elevation on the planet today. And that causes this massive high pressure system during the summer months, which results in the sucking in of all the warm, moist air from the Indian Ocean.
This seasonal weather system blows in across India. Clouds build and rise as they hit the high mountains and form heavy rains which fall across India. Those rains reach their maximum on the southern slopes of the Himalayas.
During the height of the summer monsoons, some of these rivers are able to rise by 20 or 30 feet in one storm. So where I'm standing now, the levels of the river will be way up over here.
Each year, 264 cubic miles of fresh water, enough to fill Hoover Dam's Lake Mead 30 times over, pours down the slopes of the mountains. This water feeds some of the largest rivers in the world: the Ganges, the Indus, the Irrawaddy, and the Yangtze. The Himalayas are the water tower of Asia, supplying fresh water to a fifth of the world's population. But all this water is having a dramatic effect on the mountains. Fast-flowing rivers cut steep-sided valleys. High in the mountains, rain turns to snow, feeding glaciers which carve into the upper slopes. All these forces are at work today, wearing away at the Himalayan peaks. Because the monsoon is so powerful, geologists suspect that Everest and the Himalayas are being worn away perhaps more quickly